Hey there. Ready to dive into a topic that affects us all?
Daylight saving time.
You got it. We're talking about that twice-a-year clock change everyone either cheers for or groans about. You know, springing forward and falling back.
All right.
Today we're going beyond just setting our clocks.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to unpack the history of daylight saving time, the debate around its future, and maybe help you figure out where you stand.
That's good.
What's fascinating is how something as simple as changing the clock connects to bigger issues.
Like what?
Energy consumption, public
Right.
safety, the economy, even the science of sleep.
It really does touch on a lot.
We've got a mix of sources today. News articles about Donald Trump's push to get rid of daylight saving time.
Interesting.
Historical accounts of how it even began, scientific studies on its impact, public opinion polls.
Public opinion is all over the place on this one.
And for some humor, even some late-night comedy.
Gotta love a little humor.
It's amazing how even something so familiar has layers of complexity. Our mission today is to go on a deep dive, trace the evolution of daylight saving time, dig into the pros and cons,
Gotcha.
and ultimately help you navigate this debate.
Because it is a debate, for sure.
Whether you love it or hate it, daylight saving time has a history and impact that goes way deeper than we realize.
Deeper than most people think.
Okay, let's rewind the clock, no pun intended, and go back to the very beginning.
Okay, back to the start.
You might be surprised to learn that daylight saving time wasn't some random idea.
It wasn't.
It was born out of necessity during World War I.
World War I.
The idea was that by shifting the clock forward, you get an extra hour of daylight in the evening, meaning less artificial light, and ultimately conserving fuel for the war effort.
Makes sense in that context.
And things get messy. World War II rolls around. 1942, daylight saving time is back, but this time it sounds like chaos.
Oh, chaos.
States and even local communities could choose their own start and end dates for the time change.
Oh, wow.
Imagine trying to coordinate anything across state lines with everyone on a different schedule.
What a nightmare.
It was a logistical nightmare.
Yeah.
So this highlighted the need for a national standard, which leads us to the Uniform Time Act of 1966.
The Uniform Time Act.
This act aimed to bring order to the chaos by setting uniform dates for daylight saving time across the nation.
Uniform dates, finally.
But even with that, the story doesn't end there.
It doesn't.
The 1970s brought a whole new chapter and experiment with year-round daylight saving time.
Year-round.
Year-round. So no more falling back.
Wow, what happened?
Tell me more about this experiment. What was the thinking behind it?
Well, initially incredibly popular.
I bet people loved the idea of extended summer evenings.
They did, but then some unintended consequences popped up.
Like what?
What could possibly be wrong with more daylight for you?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Well, shifting the clock forward also means sunrise happens later.
Oh, right.
And this impacted kids going to school in the dark, especially during winter.
Oh, no.
Increased risks of accidents, even some tragic fatalities.
That's terrible.
It became a major safety concern.
I bet public opinion flipped pretty quickly when the safety risks became apparent.
It did. By February 1974, support had plummeted.
Wow, that was fast.
It had only been 8 months since it was implemented, but the concerns were so serious.
I can imagine.
President Gerald Ford signed a bill to revert back to the system we have today.
It's clear from this historical back and forth that tinkering with our clocks is more complicated than it seems.
For sure.
There are real consequences.
Both intended and unintended.
And that brings us to the heart of the current debate, which has been reignited in part by Donald Trump.
Donald Trump.
Right. In a recent post, he declared his intention to push for ending daylight saving time for good.
Are good.
Yeah, he called it inconvenient and very costly. I have to admit, I'm curious about this one.
Why is that?
Because while Trump's claims haven't always been backed up by evidence,
Yeah,
this time there's some actual scientific support for his stance.
there is.
That's what makes this so interesting. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine has actually been advocating for making standard time permanent for years, and their reasoning aligns with Trump's stance.
Interesting.
But it's grounded in science.
Okay, I'm
They
listening.
argue that standard time is simply a better fit for our natural circadian rhythms.
Circadian rhythms, those are important.
Okay, hold on. Circadian what now? I've heard the term, but can you break that down for me and for our listeners
You bet.
in a way that makes sense?
Think of your circadian rhythm as your body's internal master clock,
Okay.
like a built-in timekeeper.
A built-in timekeeper.
It's synchronized with the natural light-dark cycle of the Earth and influences everything.
Everything.
From your sleep-wake cycles to hormone production, body temperature, even how well your brain functions.
So our bodies are basically programmed to operate on this 24-hour cycle that's in sync with the sun.
Exactly.
And when we disrupt that natural rhythm, our bodies can get out of whack.
They can't.
Is that what happens when we spring forward for daylight saving time? We're messing with our internal clocks.
Exactly, like a mini version of jet lag every spring.
Is that why we feel so groggy and disoriented after the time change?
That grogginess is definitely a common symptom, and it's a sign your body's struggling to adjust.
But the effects go way beyond just feeling tired, right?
Way beyond.
When our circadian rhythms are chronically disrupted, like with daylight saving time, it can increase our risk for health problems.
Lots of them.
The AASM mentions some pretty serious conditions: heart disease, stroke, obesity, even cancer.
It's serious.
Are they saying that these risks are connected to something as simple as changing our clocks?
The research is increasingly pointing in that direction.
Give me an example.
For example, there are studies showing that people who work night shifts or have irregular sleep schedules, which disrupts their circadian rhythms, have a higher risk of developing cardiovascular disease.
So it's not just about how much sleep we get.
Nope.
But also about the timing of our sleep and how well it aligns with our natural rhythms. Our bodies need that regular, predictable pattern of light and darkness to function optimally.
That's right.
It's like we've been trying to impose an artificial schedule on a system that's already perfectly designed.
That's a great way to put it. And that's precisely why the AASM is so adamant that permanent standard time, which aligns better with our natural circadian rhythms, would be the healthiest option for most people.
It makes you wonder why we even bother with daylight saving time in the first place, if it has such a profound effect on our health.
It's a good question.
Well, the original rationale was energy conservation.
Right.
But even that is debated today.
It is.
Some studies show only a minimal impact on energy use, while others suggest there might be some potential savings.
Okay.
And then there's the public safety argument.
What's that?
The idea that crime rates go down when there's more daylight in the evening.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Right. And we can't forget about the potential economic benefits.
What kind of benefits?
I've read that daylight saving time is believed to boost retail sales, tourism, and all sorts of recreational activities.
People are out and about more.
Exactly. So
Right.
it seems like we're looking at a real trade-off here.
In what way?
On one hand, we have potential health risks associated with disrupting our natural sleep patterns.
Okay.
And on the other hand, we have potential benefits for public safety and the economy.
Right.
It's a pretty complex equation.
It really is.
And I can see why there's so much debate around this.
So much debate.
So where does that leave us?
That's the question.
Are we destined to keep going back and forth with this clock-changing ritual forever?
It feels like it sometimes.
Or is there a chance we might see a permanent change in the future?
Let's hope so.
It seems like Donald Trump, throwing his weight behind the idea of ending daylight saving time, could add some momentum to the movement for change.
Maybe.
With the potential for a Republican-controlled House and Senate in 2025, the political landscape might be more favorable to his push. But even then, there's no guarantee that it will happen. There's still a lot of debate and uncertainty around the issue.
I hear you.
Didn't Congress try to pass legislation to make daylight saving time permanent in 2022?
They did.
What happened with that?
That was the Sunshine Protection Act. And while it did pass the Senate, it ultimately stalled in the House, which shows you just how divided opinions are on this issue.
Even among lawmakers.
Even among lawmakers.
So even with increased political will, there's no guarantee that a bill to change the system would pass smoothly.
Yep.
And we shouldn't forget that this isn't just a U.S. thing.
Oh, yeah.
Other countries are grappling with daylight saving time, too.
You bet.
Absolutely. This is a global conversation.
Yeah.
Different countries around the world have made different choices about how to handle daylight saving time.
Lots of different approaches.
What are some examples of how other countries are handling this?
Well, some countries have decided to ditch daylight saving time altogether.
Like who?
For example, Mexico ended the practice in 2022, citing potential health benefits as a key factor in their decision. They wanted to align their timekeeping with the natural light-dark cycle, which is very much in line with the recommendations from the AASM.
So in Mexico's case, it sounds like health concerns outweighed other considerations.
It seems so. However, there's an interesting twist.
What's that?
They made an exception for regions along the U.S. border where they kept daylight saving time in place.
Why would they do that if they were so focused on health benefits?
It all comes down to the realities of cross-border trade and commerce.
Ah.
Keeping those border regions in sync with U.S. time zones just made sense for practical and economic reasons.
So even when health is a primary concern, there are often other factors that come into play.
Always.
That's really fascinating. What about other countries?
Yeah.
Are there any that have gone the opposite direction and made daylight saving time permanent?
Yes. Russia is a great example. They actually implemented permanent daylight saving time back in 2011. Their stated goal was to reduce traffic accidents and energy consumption during those evening hours. But there was a political dimension to their decision as well. Some analysts suggested that the move was partly intended to foster a sense of national unity and align the country's time zone with its European neighbors.
It's amazing how a seemingly simple thing like setting our clocks can be intertwined with so many different factors.
What?
Health, economics, politics, and even national identity.
It really is.
It really highlights how seemingly isolated issues can be connected to a much broader context. And it reinforces the importance of looking at a problem from multiple perspectives.
Absolutely.
Well, you've definitely given us a lot to think about. We've explored the historical back and forth of daylight saving time, dug into the health and economic arguments, and even touched on the global perspective. This deep dive has been really eye-opening, and I'm sure our listeners are starting to see this whole clock-changing ritual in a whole new light.
I hope so. Understanding the complexities and nuances of an issue is the first step towards making informed decisions.
Before we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, I have one more question for you.
Okay, shoot.
We've talked about the potential benefits of sticking with standard time for our health.
Right.
But let's flip the script for a moment.
Okay.
What about the arguments in favor of permanent daylight saving time?
Permanent daylight saving time.
What are the potential upsides to staying on that schedule year-round?
Well, one of the biggest arguments for permanent daylight saving time centers around public safety.
Public safety.
The idea is that with more daylight in the evening, there's less opportunity for crime to occur.
Makes sense to me.
People are generally out and about, more visibility is better, and that can deter criminal activity.
That intuitively makes sense.
Right.
If there are more people out and about during daylight hours, wouldn't
Yeah.
that make neighborhoods feel safer?
And there's some evidence to support that studies have shown a correlation between extended daylight hours and reduced crime rates, particularly for property crimes like burglary and theft.
So the thinking is that criminals are less likely to target homes and businesses when there's a higher chance of being seen.
Exactly. And beyond that, there's also the potential psychological impact. People generally feel safer and more comfortable being out in their communities when it's light out. That can lead to more social interaction, more community engagement, and just an overall sense of well-being.
I can see how that would be a positive outcome.
It would be.
But what about the economic argument?
Yeah.
How does daylight saving time supposedly benefit the economy?
Well, one of the main arguments is that it boosts consumer spending. With more daylight hours, people are more likely to be out shopping, dining, and engaging in recreational activities. This can be a real boon for retail businesses, restaurants, the tourism industry, and all sorts of businesses that rely on people being out and about.
Okay, but how strong is that link between daylight and spending? It's not like people suddenly stop shopping when it gets dark.
You're right, it's not that simple. But studies have shown that even a small increase in daylight hours can have a measurable impact on consumer behavior. For example, one study found that retail gasoline sales increased significantly in the weeks after the spring transition to daylight saving time.
Interesting. So people are literally driving around more when they have that extra daylight. And presumably they're not just driving, they're stopping and spending money along the way. It's like having a little mini stimulus package for the economy twice a year.
That's the idea, though. It's important to note that not all economists agree on the magnitude of the economic impact. Some argue that the effects are temporary and that any gains are offset by losses in other areas.
So it's not a clear-cut economic win.
It's not.
But it does seem like there's at least some potential for boosting certain sectors,
There is.
right? And beyond the immediate impact on spending, there's also the argument that daylight saving time can lead to increased productivity. How so?
Well, think about it. When people have more daylight after work, they have more time to engage in activities that contribute to the economy, whether it's taking a class, starting a side hustle, or even just doing some home improvement projects.
It's like daylight saving time is giving people an extra hour to get things done.
Exactly. And that can have ripple effects throughout the economy.
Okay, so we've got reduced crime rates, increased spending, and potentially even a boost in productivity.
So far, so good.
Are there any other arguments in favor of keeping daylight saving time?
Yes. There's one more that's often cited, and it goes back to the original rationale for daylight saving time energy conservation.
I thought we talked about that.
We did.
And the evidence was kind of mixed.
It is mixed, but some studies have shown that extending daylight hours can lead to a reduction in energy consumption, particularly for residential lighting. The idea is that when it's light out later, people are less likely to turn on their lights in the evening.
Makes sense. And with energy costs on the rise, any reduction in energy use could be a significant benefit.
Right. And there's also the potential for reducing peak energy demand during those early evening hours. That can help to stabilize the electrical grid and reduce the need for firing up those less efficient power plants.
So it's not just about how much energy we use,
It's not.
also about when we use it.
Exactly. And that's why some proponents of daylight saving time argue that it can contribute to a more efficient and sustainable energy system.
Okay, so we've looked at the historical context, the scientific arguments about circadian rhythms, and now we've explored some of the potential benefits of both permanent standard time and permanent daylight saving time. It's a complex issue with valid arguments on both sides. What I'm hearing is that it's not a simple question of right or wrong. It's about weighing the potential risks and benefits and deciding which factors are most important to you.
I think that's a great summary. There are definitely trade-offs involved, and the best choice might vary depending on your individual priorities and values.
So let's bring it back to our listeners for a moment.
Okay.
Imagine you have the power to decide the fate of daylight saving time. What would you choose? Permanent standard time with its alignment with our natural sleep rhythms and potential health benefits. Permanent daylight saving time with its potential for reducing crime, boosting the economy, and maybe even conserving energy? Or would you stick with the current system with all its back and forth complexity?
That's a great question to ponder, and there's no right or wrong answer. It's about understanding the nuances and making an informed decision based on what matters most to you. If you could decide, what would you do? Permanent standard time, permanent daylight saving time, or keep things as they are?
It's a tough question.
There's no easy answer. It comes down to what's important to you. Health, safety, productivity, even just enjoying those long summer evenings.
Whatever you decide, make it an informed decision. Do your research, consider the evidence, and listen to your own body.